Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Today we'll explore the top news headlines for today, April 9th.
All right.
We have quite a range of developments to cover.
Yeah, looks like it.
From political challenges in Nigeria to a new law in Estonia and even escalating trade tensions involving the U.S. and China.
Okay, let's jump in.
So we'll start off in Nigeria
Okay.
with a pretty big legal battle brewing there. 11 governors of the People's Democratic Party have taken President Tinubu to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And this isn't just like your average lawsuit. It really gets to the core of how power is balanced in Nigeria's federal system.
Interesting.
So what's really important to understand here is what these governors are actually arguing.
Okay.
They're saying President Tinubu doesn't have the authority to suspend a democratically elected state government,
So,
specifically the government in River State.
interesting.
And these governors, I come from all over the country. Adamawa, Enugu, Osunoyo, Baji Akwa Ibom Plateau Delta, Taraba, Zamfara, and Bayelsa states.
Wow, so this is a pretty widespread group.
Exactly. It really highlights how big this case could be for the whole country.
Yeah, makes sense.
So at the heart of their argument, which is laid out in suit number SCCV 3292025, and based on 8 different legal points,
Okay.
is this really fundamental question. Can the president, under a declaration of a state of emergency, actually legally suspend a governor and deputy governor and then replace them with a sole administrator who wasn't even elected?
That's a huge question.
Right? It really makes you think about the limits of presidential power
Yeah, for sure.
in a system like Nigeria's. And on top of that, they're also questioning if even just the threat of suspending these officials through a state of emergency proclamation is against the whole idea of federalism enshrined in their constitution.
So this all goes back to...
Right, this all stems from President Tinubu's decision back in March to suspend Governor Siminalayi Fubara, his deputy, and members of the Rivers State House of Assembly, citing instability and the need for that state of emergency.
Right, and that was super controversial.
It definitely sparked a lot of debate. Tinubu's argument was that the crisis in River State had basically brought the government there to a standstill. But this case in the Supreme Court is going to be so important in figuring out just how far presidential power can go.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what they decide.
Now let's shift gears a bit and head over to Europe, specifically Estonia.
Okay.
They made a pretty significant decision there. The Estonian president just signed a constitutional amendment into law that bans non-EU citizens from voting in local elections.
So they can't vote at all?
Well, not in local elections. They can still vote in national elections.
Okay, so it's specifically local.
Right, and this is a move that directly affects Estonia's Russian minority.
How big is that minority?
It's pretty substantial, around 80,000 people.
Wow, that's a lot of people who can't vote now.
And it's interesting because this amendment got overwhelming support from Estonian lawmakers back on March 26th.
So they were pretty unified on this.
Yeah, and the main reason they gave was increasing security worries after Russia invaded Ukraine.
I can see why they'd be worried about that.
Right. The Estonian government is framing this as a necessary step to protect their national unity.
That's a tough situation.
It really is. It makes you think about the balance between security and democratic rights.
Yeah, it's not an easy one.
Especially when you look at the history there.
What do you mean?
Well, after Estonia regained its independence, a large part of their population was Russian-speaking. And they didn't automatically get Estonian citizenship because they didn't have direct family ties to the country.
So how do they get citizenship?
They have to pass an Estonian language test.
Makes sense.
But with this new law, it basically takes away a right these permanent residents had, the right to vote in those local elections.
I see.
And if you zoom out a little and look at the bigger geopolitical picture, the relationship between the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and Moscow has gotten really tense.
Yeah, not surprising with what's happening.
There are real concerns that Russia could try to exploit any divisions within these Russian-speaking minorities in these countries.
Yeah, I can see how that's a worry.
Especially since all 3 Baltic states are members of both the EU and NATO and have been strong supporters of Ukraine. So while Estonian officials are urging those affected to not feel excluded or seen only as a security risk, the impact this will have on their participation in local politics is undeniable.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue for sure.
Let's go back to Nigeria now. There's some very troubling news from Plateau State.
Oh, what's going on there?
Governor Caleb Muthwang has actually used the word genocide
Wow.
to describe the ongoing attacks happening in the state.
Seriously?
Yeah, and he's saying these attacks are being sponsored by terrorist groups.
That's terrifying.
This all comes after a recent attack in the Bokos local government area, where over 50 people were killed, and thousands more were forced to flee their homes.
It's hard to even imagine.
What's really alarming about Governor Muskwang's statement is that he truly believes these aren't just isolated incidents of conflict between farmers and herders, which is something that's happened in the past. He sees this as a calculated campaign
Wow.
to completely wipe out certain communities.
Oh, wow.
And he's implying there's some outside force backing this.
That's a serious accusation.
It is, and you can really hear the frustration in his voice when he talks about the ongoing violence. He's calling for a strong security response, and for the people behind these attacks to be brought to justice.
That sounds more than reasonable.
It's a stark reminder of the security struggles Nigeria faces. Plateau State has a long history of conflict rooted in ethnic and religious differences, as well as competition for resources. But Governor Muskwang is saying this time it's different.
Different how?
The scale and intensity of the violence
Yeah,
are unlike anything they've seen before.
I see.
He's saying that at least 64 communities across Bokos, Barkin Ladi, and Rio Melgies have been taken over by armed groups.
Taken over completely?
Yeah, he says they've been renamed and are now occupied by these groups.
That's really scary.
It's a truly disturbing situation. And he's pleading with Nigeria's security agencies to work together, share intelligence, and do whatever it takes to stop more bloodshed and reclaim these
I
communities.
believe they listen.
Okay, let's move on to Niger now. There's been a significant change regarding their national language.
What happened?
The military government has officially declared that Hausa is the new national language.
So they're replacing French.
Exactly.
Oh, it's a big change.
This was all laid out in a new charter that they released on March 31st. And now English and French are considered the working languages.
Interesting.
Now, Hausa is already the most widely spoken language in Niger. Most of their 26 million people understand it. In comparison, only about 13% of the population actually speaks French, which is a holdover from their colonial past.
Makes sense.
This new charter also officially recognizes 9 other local languages as spoken languages of Niger.
Wow, so they're really embracing their linguistic diversity.
It's important to see this decision in the context of what's been happening in Niger politically. Since the coup in July 2023,
Okay.
the military junta, led by General Abdourahmane Tiani, has been actively trying to distance themselves from France. They've expelled French troops, ended diplomatic relations, and just generally moved away from French influence.
I see.
So this language change seems like another step in that direction, asserting their national identity and sovereignty.
That makes sense.
We've seen similar things happening in neighboring countries like Mali and Burkina Faso. They're both former French colonies that now have military governments. And they've been reducing French influence as well, even going so far as to withdraw from organizations like DAS, the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie.
Wow, so the trend in the region.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
Let's turn our attention now to the situation in Gaza. Things are still very dire there.
Yeah, I've been following that.
Israel has resumed intense strikes on Gaza, and a recent attack on a residential building in the Shujaiya area of Gaza City has reportedly killed at least 20 people, and over 40 others have been injured. Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported these numbers and said they're still searching for bodies.
That's so sad.
The Israeli military has said they're looking into the incident.
Hopefully they'll release more information soon.
What's especially concerning is that this attack comes after Israel ended a 2-month ceasefire with Hamas
When did that happen?
back on March 18th. And sadly, all attempts to get that truce back in place have been unsuccessful so far.
That's terrible.
The health ministry in Gaza is reporting that at least 1,482 Palestinians have been killed since these operations started again.
Oh my.
And that brings the total death toll since the war began to a staggering 50,846.
That's just heartbreaking.
But it's important to remember what sparked this devastating conflict. Hamas's attack in October 2023 resulted in the deaths of 12,218 people in Israel, most of whom were civilians.
Yeah, that was a horrible tragedy.
Wassam Badran, a member of Hamas's political bureau, has said that a ceasefire is necessary and that they're still talking to mediators. But there aren't any new proposals on the table right now.
So they're kind of stuck.
It seems that way. Hamas says they're open to ideas that could lead to a ceasefire and put a stop to what they're calling a genocide against Palestinians. Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu have mentioned new negotiations aimed at getting more hostages released.
Right.
Of the 251 hostages Hamas took, 58 are still being held in Gaza, and the Israeli military believes 34 of them are dead.
It's just a horrific situation all around.
The human cost of this conflict is immense. Let's shift gears to a different kind of tragedy now.
Okay.
In the Dominican Republic. The roof of the Jet Set nightclub in Santo Domingo collapsed during a merengue concert.
Oh, no.
It's a devastating incident. At least 44 people have died, and 160 have been injured. Plus, the club was packed with people, including politicians, athletes, all kinds of guests. Rescue crews have been working non-stop to find anyone who might still be trapped in the rubble.
It's hard to imagine what those people are going through.
Among those who died was Nelsie Cruz, the governor of the northwestern province of Monte Cristi, and the sister of MLB All-Star Nelson Cruz.
Wow.
Several other well-known figures were injured, like former MLB pitcher Octavio Dotel, legislator Bray Vargas, and even the merengue singer Robbie Perez, who was performing when the roof collapsed, as of right now. The cause of the collapse isn't clear, but authorities are investigating, and the nightclub says they're cooperating fully. Family members have gathered outside the club, just waiting desperately for news about their loved ones. President Abinader has offered his condolences and said that rescue efforts are moving as quickly as possible, and hospitals in the area are working to identify the victims and treat the injured. It's a truly tragic event.
It really is.
Okay, let's move on to some economic news now. South Korea just announced a huge emergency support package, $2 billion to be exact.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
And it's all for their car manufacturers.
Why are they doing that?
It's a direct response to U.S. President Trump's decision to slap a 25% tariff on all imported cars.
Oh, wow. So they're trying to protect their car industry.
Exactly, and the South Korean government is warning that these tariffs could seriously hurt their economy. Cars and auto parts are some of their biggest exports to the U.S.
I can see why they're worried.
And what's really striking is how quickly South Korea reacted. President Trump announced these tariffs just last week, and they affect a bunch of different countries. But South Korea wasted no time in putting this plan together.
So how much do they export to the U.S.?
Well, last year, their auto-related exports to the U.S. totaled $42.9 billion.
That's a big chunk of their economy.
It is, and this whole situation really shows just how connected the global economy is and how much of a ripple effect trade decisions can have.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's break down South Korea's support plan a little. First, they're expanding a low-cost financing program by $2 trillion, which is roughly 1.34 billion US dollars. And then Hyundai Motor, one of their biggest car companies, is going to create a separate $1 trillion support program for domestic firms in partnership with financial institutions. And on top of that, any company hit by these tariffs will be able to defer their taxes.
So they're really throwing everything they can at this.
They are.
Yeah.
The government has been saying that it's really important to strengthen their domestic market to make up for any lost exports and to keep their manufacturing going strong. They're also planning to roll out a new system for subsidizing electric vehicles that's linked to discounts offered by manufacturers. And they're going to significantly increase government support for EVs as well.
So they're looking towards the future too.
It seems so. And President Trump apparently spoke with South Korea's acting president about these tariffs earlier this week. All these tariffs have already started to affect global stock markets. And it's a clear sign that President Trump is serious about reducing the U.S. trade deficit. Just in 2024, the U.S. trade deficit with South Korea in goods was over $66 billion.
Wow, that's a big number.
It is. All right, let's head back to Nigeria one last time. There's been a development in the security situation in Borno State.
Oh, what's happened?
The Nigerian government is pushing back against Borno State Governor Babagana Zulum's warning that the state could be losing control to Boko Haram.
What are they saying?
Well, the Minister of Information, Mohammed Idris, said that President Trump's administration is still fully committed to fighting terrorism and banditry all across the country. He pointed to successes that security agencies have had over the past 18 months as evidence that things are slowly returning to normal. The government is also calling for better cooperation between all levels of government to completely wipe out any remaining criminal elements.
So they're saying they're still on top of things.
That's the message they're sending. The defense headquarters also chimed in, emphasizing the sacrifices the military is making and the efforts they're putting in to restore peace to Borno and other troubled areas. The Director of Defense Media Operations stressed how important it is to recognize the military's work in this tough environment.
So they're defending their record.
You could say that. Now, Governor Zulim's original warning was pretty alarming.
Remind me what he said.
He said attacks and kidnappings were becoming almost daily events,
Oh, wow.
and that there was very little resistance. He specifically mentioned that military formations had been forced out of areas like Gamborungala and Gwaza local government areas.
That's not good.
Not at all. He saw it as a major setback for both Borno State and the entire Northeast region. So you have these two very different assessments of what's happening on the ground. It just goes to show how complicated this situation is.
It does.
All right, finally, let's talk about the trade war. Between the U.S. and China,
Okay.
things are really heating up. The U.S. just raised tariffs on Chinese imports to 104%.
104%. That's massive.
And this all happened on Wednesday, after a White House deadline for China to get rid of their retaliatory tariffs passed. China had said earlier that they'd fight to the end against the U.S. in this trade war.
Wow, so neither side is backing down.
It seems that way. This whole thing has been going on since President Trump's previous administration, and now it's escalating even further. So what led to this latest tariff hike? President Trump demanded that China reverse their 34% tariff increase on U.S. imports by Tuesday, or they'd face an additional 50% in tariffs, bringing the total to that 104%.
So it was an ultimatum.
Yeah, and he also threatened to stop all trade negotiations if China didn't do what he asked.
They're just playing hardball.
He's China's State Council Tariff Commission slammed the U.S. action as unilateral bullying. And President Trump was not happy with their response. His administration has said that they're going to prioritize allies and trading partners, like Japan and South Korea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has defended the tariffs, saying they're necessary to create a more balanced economic relationship with China. And the White House is portraying this as a long-term strategy to protect American jobs and industries.
So they're digging in for the long haul.
It looks like it. And right now, global markets and diplomats are all waiting to see what happens next, and if this trade war is going to escalate even more. So as we wrap up our look at today's headlines, it's pretty clear that we're living in a world full of complex and interconnected challenges, from shifts in political power to security crises, to major economic decisions and tragic events.
You said it.
These stories really highlight how dynamic the global landscape is and the huge impact these events have on people and communities around the world.
Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.